tell you a little bit about myself. So Krista introduced my professional self, but I also have a personal self, as we all do. I'm a father, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, I am a son, I'm a cyclist, and I'm a reader. These are just a few of my relationships that influence and inform me. Another really important relationship in my life is my relationship as a social worker and as a counselor. One of the things I found as a counselor is to place a relational lens when I'm working with people. People aren't the problem, it's their relationship. And maybe it might be the relationship with anger, with substances or behaviors, whether it's their mental health, and the list goes on. Part of my job as a counselor is to help us shine a spotlight on that relationship, to bring intentionality and awareness to be in that right relationship with that issue. So within a relational lens, there's a couple key learnings that really guide my work. Is number one, all relationships influence. We need to be aware of that because some of that influence can sneak up on us. There's benefits and challenges within every relationship. We need to be aware of that and proactive. Third learning is problems love it when we go on autopilot, when we just do what we do. Problems thrive within that. And last but not least, there is power in relationships. Folks, you're all here because as helpers, our relationship with work is significant. And let's face it, we spend more time in the workplace than we do with our families, than with our friends. We are going to be influenced in that relationship. And that relationship will influence us for the good and not so good. It's interesting when we take a look at the literature for the last 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of research, a lot of awareness around the downside of helping. You know those terms: vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout. Don't get me wrong, these are realities. And when we're aware of what that looks like, we can be proactive. But what's not written as much until relatively recently is more on the upsides of the work. Folks, I don't know about you, but I have the best job in the world. I get paid to learn. I get paid to grow. These learnings help me in those other important roles, such as being a good friend, a better partner, a better father. So we grow alongside of our clients. When we witness their stories of creativity, strength, and resilience, it impacts us as well. But a key learning in my career, walking alongside people and their struggles, is resilience doesn't just happen. It takes effort and it takes intentionality. So does vicarious resilience. That's a term newer in the literature. And that is something that excites me. And to tell you the truth, that's why I do the work. Vicarious resilience takes awareness, it takes effort and intentionality, it takes connections, and last but not least, hope and purpose. And we're going to be building on these themes. So this webinar can be seen as a checkup within your relationship. Folks, I just recently was at the doctor's and had my annual checkup. Folks, whether it's our physical health or our relational health, we want to have those types of checkups. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So practically speaking, this is what this webinar will look at. We're going to explore the ups and downs of the work. However, I'm going to place more attention to the upsides because that is something that hasn't been written about as much. I'm going to put a trauma lens to this relationship because let's face it, when we're in the helping professions, we know trauma is a dominant experience for many of the people that we support. And one of the things that trauma does, it ripples out, not just from the individual and the family, but starts to influence communities. It affects us as our helpers. But within that trauma lens, we also know trauma forces resilience. So we're going to take a look at that as well. But the intention of this webinar is to breed awareness and intentionality so we can be proactive in this work that I love, and I'm assuming you do as well, so we can better do it and keep at it for a long period of time. So this webinar is based off of a workshop I offer. And within that, I'm going to be offering some reflective themes. And As part of the link that you got for the Zoom link, there was also a couple handouts. And one of those handouts is that annual checkup, some guiding questions. So what I'm going to be doing with this webinar is I'm going to be introducing the reflection. However, you're going to definitely need more time and space and effort to reflect on these more intentionally. So my hope with these questions, it starts to whet your appetite, but you'll need more time around this. So some of the reflections are going to be, why do you do this work? I don't know about you folks, but it's probably not for the money, is it? So we want to get a sense around why we do this, because that's going to create an anchor to keep going. How are you in this relationship? Once again, all relationships influence. So how is it influencing you for the good and not so good? But more importantly, how do you want to be? What are key qualities, values, behaviors? What do you want to emanate from your work? When we're aware of how we want to be, we're more likely to live it. And how best can we step into it? So that is what we're going to be focusing in on. So I encourage you to take a look at that handout and continue to take notes on that, but further reflection on these themes. All right. Folks, relationships influence us in many different ways. So when I take a look at the helping profession, there's been a lot of work, a lot of awareness around the downsides, compassion fatigue, burnout, and vicarious trauma. I'm going to be expanding on these more briefly, but let's face it, that is the dominant narrative around this. That is something, if we've been in the helping field, you know these concepts. But what's newer in the literature is notions of compassion satisfaction, vicarious resilience. I'm going to be focusing in more on those themes and how to amplify that, but also how do we deal with the downsides of that helping. All right. So I'm going to start you off. And once again, these questions, you'll need more time to reflect. But I'm going to start you off with, what drew you to this work? So think back. So I've been doing this for over 30 years. And when I think about what drew me to this work, it fit for my values. You know, I firmly believe in social justice, peace building, living simply, but it also fits for my strengths. Folks, when I'm not training, I'm very introverted. And being an introvert has meant I've been a good listener, I'm a good observer. So this fits, that's what drew me initially around this. It fit for my values, it fit for my interests, it fit for my strengths. But here's the thing, all relationships change with time. So I want you to reflect on, has your relationship changed? So just even take it out of the work context. Think about your relationship with your partner or your best friend from high school. Time changes everything. And actually, that's one of the only things we can count on life is change. So how has your relationship with work changed over time? How do you understand this? And how do you feel about it? It's interesting. I'm just going to share a couple key things in my career that's really changed my relationship with work. One was an event that happened 23 years ago, and that was the birth of my first son. Folks, I started off my career working in not-for-profits. They fit with my values, they fit with my passions, and because of that, I would give a lot. You know, time is meaningless. I will give that over time. I don't need to get paid. I would be doing the reading afterwards. It's not uncommon to work 10 plus hours a day because I valued that. But 23 years ago, my first son was born. And that made me reconsider this relationship. I love my job, but you know what? I'm now a father. For me, being a dad is being involved, being active, being engaged. I can't continue on my relationship with work how it was. So I need to shift. I still don't always get it right, folks, but I have a reminder of balance. And it might be hard to see this on the screen, but this is a handwritten note my son gave to both myself and my partner when he was 5. My son was quite advanced for his age. Maybe hard to read it, but it says, please work not as much as usual. Folks, I have this tacked up in my office. It is a reminder of I want to be a dad as well. Another key thing that's really changed my relationship is actually starting an independent practice. I've spent the vast majority of my career working in not-for-profits that really fit with my values. Working in independent practice means I have greater freedom. My clientele has changed. People see me because their benefit of package allows it, or they have the financial means to pay for this. So as I've been reflecting who I'm working with, the clientele has changed. The needs have changed. The issues have changed than when I was in not-for-profits. And in fact, when I start to reflect on it, I've kind of strayed from my social work values, working more grassroots. And so with that reflection, I've started to do more pro bono work, reduced rates, doing webinars like this for others around this. So I've had to adjust because I want to continue to be value driven. Folks, there's always going to be change. We need to reflect on this. Another really important question, I think this is actually one of the most important questions I'd encourage you to reflect on. Why do you do this work? Why do you continue in this relationship? As I mentioned, problems love autopilot when we just do what we do. Folks, you remember doing Counseling 101 or Communication Skills 101? We were taught don't ask why questions because there's a judgment to it. So I don't want to judge people. I want people to help judge their behaviors, their relationships, to create some intentionality. So why do you do this type of work? So for me, it still fits with my values. But it's interesting why I'm doing this is I love learning and I learn in conversations. And that helps me grow as an individual, as a partner, as a parent. So for me, that is some of the key things that I do this. What about for yourself? What reminds you of why you do this work? And more importantly, how do you hold these close? So folks, I'd really encourage you to spend some time and reflecting on those two initial questions. When we have that, why do we do this? What that's doing is it creates an anchor. An anchor holds us in place. For me, an anchor is the opposite of a trigger. A trigger is one of those things that shoots us into an issue, such as a problem. Folks, I don't need to tell you our work can be challenging, especially when it comes to systemic realities. Do you find yourself questioning, what the heck's the point? Why bother given the state of the world? When we have that firm understanding, this is why I do the work, it holds us into place, and that allows us to better sit with those challenges. All right, I'm going to shift gears, and I'm also going to place a trauma lens to the work. Very briefly, this is not a trauma workshop, but let's face it, it's influential in my work, as I would imagine yours as well. Folks, there's two dominant stories when it comes to trauma. And the first story is the trauma story. And rooted in that is a situation of danger. It's a reality of hopeless, helpless, and powerlessness. I can't stop this. I have no control. And trauma also thrives in that situation of isolation, disconnection, when people, even if people are around, they can't help you. Folks, that story plays out in nightmares and flashbacks. Any reminders of this brings that trauma story right back. And quite literally, that's why the pandemic was pretty brutal. The pandemic mimics trauma, danger, hopeless, helpless, isolation. So that is the dominant story. But here's the reality. There's another story that always accompanies. If people are still around, and let's face it, there's a strong relationship between trauma and suicide. if people are still here, there's another story that's there. And that is a story of survival. That is a story of resilience, strength, and creativity. And one of the things I find is trauma forces resilience, whether we like it or not. But it doesn't come easy, it takes effort. I'm going to shine a spotlight on that. So when we look at this, and once again, you might have been able to pick up, I'm very interested in influence. When I take a look at that trauma lens, I want to hold both those stories when I'm working with people, the trauma story and the resilience story. For some of you that have kids or have been a kid at some point, you might have visited one of those science museums. Do you remember that cone thing where you put in the coins and the coins go round and around and around and around and eventually disappear? I think that's kind of like that trauma story. We have the negative impacts and we have the resilience, and they continue to whirl around. And ultimately, it does influence the person, but it also influences those around them, friends, family, community. It influences us as helpers. So, a person working with people that have experienced a lot of trauma, these stories of pain and resilience influence me, and I want to hold both and be proactive with both. So I'm going to shine a spotlight around vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. However, I'm not going to spend too much time with that because, once again, that is a very dominant story in the helping fields. We've heard these terms. I want to spend more time with those newer terms, vicarious resilience and compassion satisfaction. But let's first turn to some of the downsides for helping. So, if you've been working in this field, you've heard those terms. I'm just going to give a very basic definition from one of the leaders within this. Charles Figley was one of those pioneers within that to really recognize and give name to those downsides. And Charles Figley defines vicarious trauma as this: the natural consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about a traumatizing event experienced by another, the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. So that is vicarious trauma. But that is one package of part of the downsides we may or will experience. So a couple quick differentiations between this. Compassion fatigue. Folks, there's a price to helping, and that price is energy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes intentionality. Folks, we are in this work because we care. Do you ever notice it would be a lot easier to do this job if we didn't care? Because if we don't care, it doesn't affect us. But people know when we've stopped caring. So the price of caring is energy. So compassion fatigue is my caring has drained me. And folks, I don't know about you, but I definitely experience this, and I'm currently experiencing this. I find more of my downsides, the helping, happen more in spring and early summer. And that's because I work hard during the year. And over the summer, I'm very fortunate. I take a good part of the summer off. But it's that gearing up for that time where I'm just starting to feel those effects. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like for me. So, compassion fatigue is I'm exhausted from caring. Vicarious trauma, actually, one of the definitions around that is I care too much. My caring is starting to take in the burdens of the other. It is starting to affect me and how I see myself and the world around me. So that vicarious trauma might be I care too much. And I've experienced parts of those. I haven't experienced burnout. For me, burnout is I couldn't care less. Folks, when I give up caring, when I become indifferent, that is one of those strong indicators. I need to get out. I need to do something different. So here's some of the realities. These downsides of helping, that's the price we pay for this work. Many of you will have seen that brilliant Brene Brown video, Empathy versus Sympathy. If you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. But one of the things that Brene Brown says is empathy is a choice, but it is a vulnerable choice. So when we resonate, when we empathize with others, we resonate with their pain and their suffering and their struggling. It will affect us. But here's the upside: their success, their joy, their resilience, they will also affect us. But we'll get into that. So this reflects on helping others. Folks, it can also be part of our work environment. We spend more time with our colleagues within our workplaces than we do with our family. Once again, this is not a trauma workshop, but one of the things I found is trauma can start to seep into workplace culture if we're not aware and proactive. Do you ever notice some workplaces that deal with a lot of crisis and trauma start to become more hierarchical, more punitive, working in isolation, change resistant? This is how we've done it. Does that sound familiar? So here's the thing: we need to be proactive, but that's a whole other workshop. These types of problems can also be about our beliefs about ourselves and the work. And I'm going to talk about the beliefs in just a little bit. But if I believe people are unskilled, unknowing, that means I need to teach, I need to inform, I need to rescue. And folks, that's a lot of pressure. That's going to affect me. So I'm going to talk about some positive beliefs and attitudes about people and the work that kind of keeps me going. Last but not least, folks, many of you are coming from BC, and actually these concepts of vicarious resilience, compassion, satisfaction come from BC's own Vicki Reynolds. I've seen her a couple times. But one of the things I remember seeing Vicki Reynolds, and she was talking about her clients' stories don't impact her as much. It's systemic poverty, racism, homophobia, transphobia, the list goes on. I don't know about you folks, but I can relate to that. Those systemic problems, those things I don't have as control over, those are what really affects me. That too is a whole other workshop: the need for compassionate communities. So here's the thing: the downside of work is a reality, and it doesn't discriminate, regardless of your education, regardless of your experience. These downsides can seep in, and maybe it happens over time. I've been doing this work for over 30 years. I've experienced layer upon layer upon layer. For me, it's not necessarily that one event that's really affected me, but it's all of those things over time. But these problems can also happen fairly immediately, relating to a particularly traumatic situation. So one of the key things is recognizing, what do those downsides look like? And this slide is just one of them. These are just a quick overview. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but lack of energy, withdrawing and isolating, lack of trust, cynicism, being very sensitive, fear and anxiety, that lack of confidence, hopelessness and powerlessness, intrusive thoughts, those blurred boundaries. Do you ever find it influences our sleep or numbing? Folks, so I'm an independent practice. So I'm reliant on people contacting me for services. Just the other week, I have an online calendar program and I forgot to block off my time. I was hoping to get out for a bike ride. And all of a sudden, I saw in my calendar program, someone scheduled themselves in, a new client in the afternoon. But that's where I was hoping to go for bike riding. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I was a little annoyed. What? I gotta work? What do you mean? I was doing a workshop last week and I love training. I love working with people, and I hope that passion's coming out, folks. But gearing up for the training the day of, I don't want to do this. But it's interesting. Once I start, I become engaged. Folks, I've noticed a lower energy with me, as well as numbing. How many of you watched the one Netflix show last night, to 2 to 3? What goes really well with Netflix? Chips. What else goes well with Netflix and chips? Perhaps beer. Folks, I've been numbing a lot recently. So I can relate to the avoiding, the lack of energy, the numbing, the mood, that frustration. And when I can recognize them, John, what's going on? This is not like you. You need to do something different. So, folks, I'd really encourage you to think of, what do your downsides look like? How do you recognize that? How do you deal with that? So here's the realities, folks. There is a downside to every relationship. That is normal and natural. There's challenges with your partner. There's challenges with your friends or your kids. All relationships contain challenges as well as benefits. It doesn't discriminate. So here are the realities. These downsides can be disruptive and they can be distressing. If you're recognizing that, look after yourselves, seek help. But here's the thing. These realities can be minimized or even prevented. They can be addressed and overcome. And last but not least, we can experience the downsides of helping alongside the upsides. So I want to now spend more of our attention on the upsides of helping. Vicarious resilience, compassion, satisfaction. Folks, a key learning in my career, and most of my career has been supporting people in the aftermath of trauma. And do you ever notice that trauma brings in its good friends, such as mental health issues, such as the need for numbing? One of the things I've learned in my career is our struggles are our best teachers. Trauma forces resilience, whether we like it or not. And one of the things I've learned in my career is people are amazing. I have been very privileged to witness, to acknowledge both struggle and growth throughout my career. And those are some of the things, that growth is what keeps me going. So, folks, I collect stories, I collect experiences, I archive these, and I come back to those because I too have those dark days where I start questioning, what's the point? And when I start to look at these stories, I'm reminded of that anchor of why I do the work. So once again, we know what resilience is, but I thought I would just throw very basic definition from the American Psychological Association. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant stress. And that might be family, relational issues, health problems, workplace financial stressors. It's bouncing back. So here's the thing. Resilience is part of struggle, but it doesn't come easy. It takes effort, it takes intentionality. And very much like trauma, trauma is very sociable. It ripples out from the individual, affecting family, friends, community, ourselves as helpers. But what else is very sociable is resilience. Resilience ripples out as well. And folks, when I'm paying attention to resilience, it rubs off on me. It inspires me, it grows me, and that is why I do the work. So when we look at resilience and compassion, satisfaction, and resilience, these might be related to helping others. And once again, these terms, compassion, satisfaction, and vicarious resilience, I first heard this from BC's own Vicki Reynolds. And that has to do with helping others. When I see people grow, when I see people change, it continues to inspire me. Folks, I've had clients where I've sat with them in their grief and in their trauma, sat with them. And over that time, they've been able to transform that trauma into that resilience. And that has inspired them to go on to their education. To actually, I've had clients who are now coworkers. Folks, when I see that, I am changed. So there's that benefit from helping others. But these satisfaction and resilience also relates to our belief about ourselves and others. I'm going to talk a bit about that. And last but not least, our workplace. It's interesting. My career path has been a social worker and counselor. My partner's career path has been at that of mediator. So there's actually a lot of parallels between a mediator and a counselor. But my partner, their area of expertise is more workplace conflict. And I've learned vicariously a lot from my partner around that. It's very easy for workplace to go into unhealth. And I'm sure you've seen that. It takes a lot of effort to create healthy workplaces, but it's very needed. So one of the things I'm going to be talking about is kind of how do we build on these upsides. Less so, we're not going to talk as much about that work environment. Once again, that is a whole nother workshop or a whole nother webinar. So here's the realities of vicarious resilience, compassion, satisfaction. These upsides can occur with the downsides. Resilience, and I've had the pleasure to observe, to acknowledge, to witness resilience for over 30 years. And although resilience comes out as part of struggle, it takes awareness. It takes effort and focus on ourselves. It takes connections, that support. And last but not least, it takes hope and purpose. And that's what I want to focus in on. So awareness, effort, support, and connection and hope. For me, these are the building blocks of resilience. And that's what I want to spend the rest of this webinar just quickly going over some of that and helping you reflect. Folks, there's no change without awareness. So first we need to be aware of how we are in this relationship. So folks, that is actually one of my all-time favorite questions as a counselor is to ask, how are you in this relationship with your partner? How are you in this relationship with alcohol? How are you in this relationship with anger? How are you in this relationship with conflict? How are you in this relationship with work? And this comes from some key points. And number one is identity is not static. Identity is fluid. Do you ever notice your different parts of you come out in different circumstances? Folks, right now you're seeing Trainer John, which is more outgoing, more talkative, more sharing. But if you were to meet me at a party, at a get together, I'd be very quiet. As I mentioned, I'm more naturally introverted. But because I love being a trainer, a different part of me comes out. So think about your own self. Are you a different person at work than you are with your partner? How do things change when you get together with your best friend from high school? So once again, who we are shifts and changes with time. So I want you to reflect on this. And once again, you're going to need more time. How are you in this relationship with work? What does it bring out in you? And I want you to consider what are some qualities? What are some key behaviors? What are some attributes? And I want you to think about both the positive as well as the negative. So, folks, I love how I am at work. I'm more outgoing. I'm curious. I'm compassionate. I see these qualities. But it's interesting. As I mentioned, I see some of the downsides in my work, some of those ups and downs. I see more of those downsides in spring and early summer. And that's where I find I'm getting a little bit more grumpy, a little bit more avoiding, a little bit more numbing, lacking of enthusiasm. I don't think it comes out as much in work. Once again, I put on my work persona. Where do you think it does come out? It comes out at home. Do you find that as well? So I need to pay attention to that. And when I recognize those effects, I can start to ask myself, do you like what you see? And when I see avoiding, when I see grumpiness, when I see indifference, I don't like that. That's not how I want to be at work or with my family or my friends. So I'd encourage you to continue to think about that. How are you in this relationship? I encourage you to spend some time, take down some notes, and place some of that judgment. Do you like what you see? And if not, What can you do about it? Second set of questions that I find really important in my career is, how do you want to be in this relationship? How do you want to be as a partner? How do you want to be in your relationship with anger, with conflict, with alcohol? The list goes on. So I encourage you to think about, when you look at your role as helper, whatever that is, how do you want to be? What are those qualities? What are those attributes? What are those abilities? What are those behaviors and strengths? I also want you to think about, why is this important? And reflect on, how have you recently lived those things? And how can you invite more of it? Once again, I've learned that problems love autopilot. So when we're aware of how we want to be in relationship, we're more likely to live it. I'm going to share just a personal story, not a professional story, but another really important role, and that is that of a father. You know, within any role, with any relationship, there's always conflict. And this was an experience I had a couple years ago with my son. And I blew up at my son. I can't remember what the context was, but I was pissed off. I wasn't in a good space. My son was a teenager at that time, and gotta love teens to keep you humble. Kid you not, this is how, when I blew up at my son, this is how my son responded to me. Dad, you're a counselor, right? I sometimes hear you upstairs in your office doing your Zoom workshops. I hear you talk about the need to be curious, to be compassionate, to be understanding. Folks, I was none of those things at the moment, at that time. In my head, I didn't say it, but in my head, I'm like, oh, you little shit. Because it was true. I was none of those things, because I was angry. I was stressed. I was overwhelmed. It wasn't how I wanted to be. So that was, for me, was a really important learning. Folks, I need to cut myself some slack. I'm not always the best trainer. I'm not always the best counselor, not always the best social worker, not always the best father. But when I'm aware of how I want to be, I'm more likely to live them. So that is the first part around dealing with the downsides and the upsides, is first creating that awareness. How are you in this relationship? How do you want to be? What are signs of problems? What are signs of health? Folks, I think the slides might be made available to you as well. One slide I did add, and I forgot to with the original slides. There is a free resource called the Professional Quality of Life Scale, the ProQual. It's a free resource as long as you don't alternate it or alter it, and give credit to the organization, Handelsstrom. Anyways, that's the website. And within that, there is just a questionnaire where you score yourself in different sort of questions, such as, I am happy. I am preoccupied with more than one person. I get satisfaction from helping people. I feel connected. So it's one of these scaling things. And what it does is it kind of gives you a basic rating on how at risk are you for compassion fatigue, for compassion satisfaction. Once again, it's not a diagnostical thing, but for me, I do this a couple times a year, just a bit of a check-in. John, how are you doing? And when I see those lower numbers, it's kind of like, okay, maybe you need to scale back what you're doing. Okay. So that is the first part, is awareness. There is no change without that awareness. The second thing is effort and intentionality. And within that, I just want to highlight a couple things. Self-care, I'm not going to spend too much on that because we know the importance of that, but also our connections and our beliefs and values. So those are some of those things around focusing inward. And I don't know about you, yourself personally, but as a helper, as a social worker, I'm so used to looking after everyone else. I sometimes forget about myself. Can you relate to that? As a counselor, I work with all sorts of people, but some of my most challenging clients are other helpers, social workers, because they're so used to helping others. What do you mean I need to be vulnerable? I need to look after myself. So, folks, I just want to highlight just a little bit on self-care. It's interesting. When I began my career, oh, we need self-care. And what is that? Well, it's bubble baths, it's reading. Got a little cheesy. Within the last 10, 15 years, I actually started to hear more about, well, there's different types of self-care. There's physical self-care, there's psychological self-care, there's emotional self-care, spiritual self-care. And that might be sort of a faith-based, or for me, spiritual self-care is more meaning and purpose, connection to something bigger than me, whether that's nature or whatever that might be, as well as professional and workplace self-care. And I don't know about you, but I have strengths in some of these areas, and I have challenges. I'm actually fairly good with physical self-care. Folks, I love to walk. I love to be in nature. I love to cycle. I'm passionate about cycling. And in fact, later on tonight, I'm going to go for a long bike ride. That's how I unwind. That's how I do my best thinking. So I encourage you to think about, where are your strong points with self-care? Where are some of the challenges? How can we add more within this? As I mentioned, one of the influences on the ups and downsides of work is our workplace environment. What's actually newer in the literature as well is shifting beyond, well, you need self-care, to shifting the need, and don't get me wrong, self-care is important, but shifting it into we care. How do we look after each other? Whether that's peer support, whether it's checking in, whether it's recognition, and so on. But that is how healthy workplaces are created, is they emphasize we care. But once again, that's a whole other webinar. Other areas of effort is our connections. Another key learning in my career, I've shared a couple of them, but another key learning for me is problems love silence, problems love isolation. And when we understand that, health and healing is in connections. So once again, from a relational standpoint, all relationships energize, but all relationships also, there's a cost to that. So our relationships are flows of energy. So one of the practical tools that I've included within this is what's known as an eco map. Now, this is a classic social work tool. And what it is just mapping out our different interactions with people, with work, with interests, with nature, all those different people, systems, all those things where we're involved in. And what this eco map does is we draw arrows when the energy is going away from us, as well as arrows going in. And sometimes there's mutual. Other times there's more arrows going out, or there's more arrows coming in. So the arrows mark the flow of energy. A dotted line means it's a distant relationship or a lesser relationship. X's or cross means it is a conflicted relationship. So I'm going to invite you once again. You don't have time to do this, but with the slides, you'll have that instructions. I'd encourage you to map out your eco map. So this is just very briefly, I started to map myself out. Folks, my family and my work, these are my two most important relationships. And within that, a lot of energy goes into it. But because I love my job, because I love my family, I also get a lot back from it. So it's very mutual. Folks, my mom is older, and when I was a kid, she looked after me. Now I'm doing more of that looking after her. I love to read. I spend a lot of time, but it also energizes me. As I mentioned, when in not as a good space, I'm numbing more. And that might look at binge watching TV. It might be food. It might be alcohol. So lately, I've been noticing a more numbing. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with numbing. We all need that. But I've been noticing too much energy has been going into it and not enough going back. Music used to be a big part of my life, but it's more distant. As I mentioned, summertime, I'm biking lots, I'm camping lots. But you know what becomes more distant, especially when I get wrapped up in work and family, is my friendships. And folks, I need those other relationships. So what I love about this eco map is it gives me some indicators on that flow of energy. It gives me that realization of, huh, no wonder you're not sleeping well, John. No wonder you feel so drained. You're giving too much. You need to have some more replenishing. Or when was the last time you visited with your good friend? So what I like about that, it creates that awareness to intentionality. Now it's interesting, folks. We're going to open up in questions in just a little bit. There's a couple other key concepts before open up for that questions. When I've done this with others in the social services agencies, especially not for profits, I've noticed a big theme when people have done this. And when people have reflected on that, more energy is going out. Can you relate? As helpers, we are more used to looking after other people than themselves. So part of that reflection is, what themes do you notice? Do you like what you see? If this were to continue for this year, for next, where might it take you? If you were to make some changes, where might it lead you? So that is more that effort. Another key thing around this is what guides our work. What are our beliefs? What are our values? And how does that influence? Once again, our beliefs influence our behaviors. So what are some of your beliefs about people, about their struggles, about their strengths, about their resources? We can't control the systemic realities, but we can have control of ourselves. And when we're aware of our beliefs and attitudes, we can take a look at how that might guide us. So I'm just going to share a couple of my key beliefs. And some of my key beliefs that keep me healthy, that keep me sort of more resilient is this. People are resilient. Folks, people have had an entire story before they've met you. And not only that, they'll have an entire story before or after they leave you. They've gone through so much. It is a pleasure and honor to work with people and witness that resilience. I walk alongside them briefly. I want to be influential, but I'm one of many. Change is constantly happening, whether it's small or big. People do the best they have with what they got. And we need to be aware of that. And that speaks to that strength. Folks, I like to think I'm good at what I do. But you know what? I'm one influence amongst many. If I see myself as the hero, if I see myself as a rescuer, there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, and that keeps me up at night. So when I see myself as influential, but not the influence, I'm better able to rest. Folks, there's a brilliant quote by the educator Parker Palmer, and the quote goes roughly like this. Humanity does not want to be fixed, saved, or cured in their struggle, but rather to be acknowledged and witnessed as they are. Folks, that is how I see my job is acknowledging and witnessing. And that's not passive. That is interacting with good questions. So when I see myself as acknowledging and witnessing, I see myself setting up the stage for change, but my job is not to create the change. So these are some of those beliefs that keep me healthy, that keep me engaged. And when I'm holding these forefronts, I'm better able to let go of those downsides. But if I see people as weak, as struggling, as needing, then I need to rescue. And that is a whole other story that affects me in so many different ways. So, what are your core beliefs about people, about struggle, about resilience? Last but not least, another key ingredient to resilience is hope. There's no possibility without hope. So when I look at vicarious resilience, I need to take a look at what gives me hope around this. And within that, I think about stories. I've witnessed hundreds of stories around this. I'm a collector of stories, and unfortunately, we're almost out of time. I want to open up for questions, but there is a story within this. There's a story. I collect these. I continue to reflect on them, and they continue to inspire. So, who in your work has demonstrated resilience? How do you notice it? How does that influence? How do you keep that close? Once again, that purpose. And this goes back full circle. What first attracted you to this work? How have things changed? Why do you do this? And what reminds you? So, folks, just in conclusion, resilience does not come easy. It takes awareness, it takes effort, it takes support and connection, it takes hope. We see that in our clients. And if we're going to build on the upsides of our work, we need to hold these close. Awareness of the downsides and the upsides. Place that effort, those connections, and hope. So, folks, once again, all relationships influence. It's a lot easier to go into downside. It doesn't take effort to fall into problem. It takes more effort to remain healthy. But you know what? I love my job. And in order to keep doing that, I need to put in the effort. That's what I got for you, folks. Carissa, we have a little bit of time for some questions. Did anything stand out in terms of questions that people were putting forward to you?
Yeah, feel free if anyone has questions to pop them in the chat. Right now I only have one. Juliana asks, being proactive about reducing complacency and change resistance in the work, is there a separate workshop for that?
Oh, hey, Carissa, repeat that question. I need to think on that one just a little bit more.
Yeah, no worries. Being proactive
Hmm.
about reducing complacency and change resistance in this work.
Okay, is there a workshop on that?
Yeah, she's asking if there's a workshop.
Well, Juliana, I think that would be a great topic around that. And for those that are hosting this workshop, that might be a call for the next good webinar around that. So you might be planting some seeds around that for us to further consider. Anything else?
There is, oh, one just popped up. What is the difference between being Pollyanna, too positive about your expectations, about how people will act, and trying not to be too negative?
Oh my goodness. That is a great question. And you know what? A great question means I need to think a little bit more on that. So I think that's all a balance because if all we see is the positive, and folks, that's going to influence how we interact. So we need more of that realistic. But part of that realistic is struggle is part of life, as is resilience. And you know what? If we just hold up the resilient, we diminish their struggle. But if all we hold up is their struggle, we don't see the resilience. So it's that holding this together. And when we do that, we're respecting the person's experience as they move forward. Folks, we're right at the tail end, and there might be other questions. There might be more interest. And so I've included my contact information, and I'm just going to invite you, if you have further thoughts, questions, ideas, feel free to reach out, whether it's by email, check out my website if you're interested, or give me a shout. Or if you're interested in this workshop for your own organization, feel free to give me a call as well.